Just 3 days after being sworn in to serve his first term in Congress, Representative Peter Meijer, a Republican from Michigan, was among the lawmakers in the House chamber last January when pro-Trump rioters attacked the Capitol. He voted later with 9 other House Republicans to impeach then-President Donald Trump. That decision has resulted in death threats, and now he is facing a Trump-endorsed primary challenger as he runs for re-election. Congressman Peter Meijer joins us from Grand Rapids. Congressman, thank you so much for being with us. As we said, you were in the House chamber on that day. What memories does it come back to you as you reflect on that?
I would thank you for having me tonight. I would say just feelings of anger, of frustration, of feeling like something sacred was being trampled on, and that, in the history that was made, a very dark possibility raised of the threat that every 4 years we would no longer have a peaceful transfer of power, but that we've just chosen to expand what we compete on in a political playing field outside of elections, outside of our institutions, and frankly put everything up for a debate.
As we mentioned, you were one of just a handful of Republicans to vote to impeach President Trump over inciting that riot. And we also mentioned death threats. You've had a reaction, very negative reaction from your constituents, even from family members. Are you able to have a rational discussion about what happened with any of these people?
Certainly on a one-on-one basis. I think oftentimes we'll find that the misunderstanding or where we differ is a lot less significant than it may appear from the outside, especially talking about the lack of response in the immediate hours after the Capitol was broken into. There's obviously people who still have very strong beliefs about the November 2020 presidential election. But when you start to get down to brass tacks and what actually occurred, clear away some of the fog, some of the deception and the misinformation that's out there, it's very hard to justify how the former president reacted, at the very least in the hours after the Capitol was attacked, when the vice president and the next 2 individuals in the presidential line of succession were under assault in the Capitol.
Well, I want to ask you about how you reconcile those views, because in a poll we've just done, only 10% of Republicans said they could call what happened on January 6th an insurrection. And then coupled with that, you have the great majority of Republicans who don't believe President Biden won. How do you explain these views, both of which are clearly not based on facts?
I think whenever you're asking a survey or a polling question, there's a certain defensiveness that can come in. I think I've seen that plenty of times where somebody will publicly be very defensive, and then on a one-on-one conversation, where the guards let down, where somebody doesn't feel like it's their tribe against another, they're more than willing to accept and acknowledge things. But when we have a highly polarized context, when it's black or white, when it's all or nothing, when we're dealing with absolutes, it's very tempting to feel like it's us versus them, when at the end of the day, we're all Americans.
But 10% of the Republican Party members of the Republican Party saying they don't think it was an insurrection. I also want to ask you, Congressman, about you did an interview with NBC News over the weekend. You were asked about President Trump, whether there was another option for the Republican Party other than to support him, and you said there's no other option. I mean, what is it?
To clarify, when asked about why there was the reversion back after January 6th to supporting Donald Trump, I said because individuals did not see an alternative. They did not see another path. Not that there is no choice, but that we need to be creating the path. We need to be working on what a party that is reflective of the concerns of conservative Americans, but that also is a party that adheres to the rule of law, what that looks like. And to me, that is a charge. That is an opportunity to be defining that, not succumbing to a belief that there is no other option, but that the charge is to create it. And just to clarify on that poll, that only 10% of Republicans described it as an insurrection, I think the other options were a protest or a riot. And I think riot was 30%, and I think protest was 40%, if I'm referencing the same poll.
But I think it's clear that you and you listening to the police officers we just heard from, there's no doubt in there, or at least what came across is they believe this was an attempt to overthrow the results of the election. Congressman, you didn't vote for this January 6th committee in the House. You've said that you want to wait and see what the work product is. But I did interview yesterday the longtime partner of Brian Sicknick, who was the Capitol police officer who died the day after the attack on the Capitol. And she said unless members of Congress, including Republicans, are able to hold President Trump accountable, there's going to be more violence. What do you say to Sandra Garza, who, again, longtime partner of Brian Sicknick?
I say we absolutely have the same fears, that I grieve for the tragedy that struck her and her family in those moments. I mean, the loss of Officer Sicknick, and then the subsequent loss of several other Capitol police officers and Metropolitan police officers who took their own lives in the days and weeks and months that followed is an absolute tragedy, and why it is even more frustrating to see people whitewash and downplay the events of January 6th. We have to face it for what it was. We have to recognize the threat of political violence and say that we should not be tolerating that. That was one of the reasons why I voted for impeachment. The fact that we cannot, in our political system, be playing around with such dangerous rhetoric and encouraging, spurring, inciting people to go and try to use force, use threats, use violence in order to achieve a political end. That cannot be tolerated in our politics. But I would say, sorry.
Excuse me, I was just going to say, but the leadership of your party in the House and the majority of Republican members of the House are saying that this committee shouldn't be there, it shouldn't be doing this work, that it's important to look ahead, not to look back. In other words, it's just the opposite of what these police officers and what Ms. Garza are calling for.
And there were dozens of my Republican colleagues who voted in support of a bipartisan independent commission that was styled after the 9/11 commission. And I think I'm still deeply disappointed and frustrated that that commission was not formed. Again, I said that I will look at the work product and the results coming out of the January 6th Select Committee, as it continues along. But in my mind, the opportunity that was missed, and I hope that the ultimate work product will be this, was to have something that could be looked at and viewed objectively by the American people, that can be clearing away a lot of, again, the rumors and the innuendo and the deception and the misinformation, the whitewashing, the blame casting that we saw in the days, weeks, and months after January 6th, and still, today trying to make it seem like anything other than it was, which was a violent attempt to interfere with the proceedings of Congress, and specifically the certification of the Electoral College results.
And we're hearing your voice, a minority voice in the Republican Party. Congressman Peter Meijer, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.
And tomorrow we want to say we will continue our coverage of the January 6th anniversary, including a conversation with the chairman of the House Democratic Caucus, Hakeem Jeffries of New York.